You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back to another Warrior Creed live stream with me, the Radical Majid Nawaz. And on your screens about now is the topic for today. You can see Trump and Putin cancel World War III and send peace envoys to resolve Ukraine war in Saudi Arabia. And the graphic we've used here, captioned with a huge Trump walking towards Putin, sat at a desk with the word peace talk written above the desk. And the caption, I want Europe to go to war against Russia. You can't talk to Putin without my permission. An increasingly small Zelensky being dragged against his will by Trump to the negotiating table. And that is the topic for today. It is, folks, as we expected for a very, very long time. Let's begin by the Trump announcement itself, which is should be on your screens about now. Trump has posted, dated the 12th of February, before the current peace talks in Saudi Arabia were initiated. Trump posted, I just had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. We discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, the power of the dollar, and various other subjects. We both reflected on the great history of our nations and the fact that we fought so successfully together in World War II, remembering that Russia lost tens of millions of people, and we likewise lost so many lives, We each talked about the strengths of our respective nations and the great benefit that we will someday have in working together. But first, as we both agreed, we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia-Ukraine. President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto of common sense. We both believe very strongly in it. We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. It's all sounding very cordial, isn't it? He carries on. We have also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately, and we will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation. Interestingly, to inform him post-fact, as you can see. To continue reading, something of which I will be doing right now. I've asked Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Director of the CIA John Ratcliffe, National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, and Ambassador and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to lead the negotiations, which I feel strongly will be successful. Millions of people have died in a war that would not have happened if I were president, but it did happen, so it must end. No more lives should be lost. I want to thank President Putin for his time and effort with respect to this call, and for the release yesterday of Mark Fogel, a wonderful man that I personally greeted last night at the White House. I believe this effort will lead to a successful conclusion, hopefully soon. And there we have it, folks. That is effectively President Trump declaring an end to World War III before it even began, as we have long forecasted on Radical Media would happen. It is now happening with President Trump in his third term of office, the second legitimate term having been illegitimately interfered with by the Biden administration, the globalist, corporatist-owned media, and the Democratic Party. Nevertheless, President Trump, not just the Democratic Party, including the rhinos, but President Trump now in his third term, as we forecasted, will cancel World War III and bring about not just an end to the war between the US, the European Union, and Britain and NATO powers and their proxies against Russia and her proxies in Ukraine, with the biggest corrupt, money laundering little man you will ever come across, the former comedian Zelensky. The fact is that that war isn't the only war that's going to end. But as we said, if you recall, when Assad fell, and the title will be on your screens right now, reported by Radical Media, 11th of December, Syrian revolution, it's called. Trump and Putin cut a deal to de-escalate World War III. So as we forecasted then, we're going to read to you the quote: a grand regional settlement led by Trump is already on the table. Russia has been promised a quid pro quo deal in Ukraine in return for acquiescing to a deal in Syria. So in other words, this current round of peace talks in Saudi Arabia, interesting location, by the way, because of what we're about to say, the peace is not curtailed nor restricted to Ukraine. This is part of a larger, what we're calling a grand regional settlement, is part of a larger peace for the world negotiations, Operation Peace Spring, as it is formally known by the Trump administration. And that is that a deal, in fact, by all accounts, it's a deal that leaves out the European Union, even if I dare say, leaves out the United Kingdom in the initial stages, and leaves out, particularly leaves out Zelensky of Ukraine. And it's a deal struck first and foremost between Trump and Putin directly on bilateral terms, but then in addition, struck between the United States of America, Russia, and China with Xi. That is the deal, first and foremost between Putin and Trump, secondarily between Trump, Putin, and Xi. And then the rest of us get involved. Probably the United Kingdom, in order of priority, comes after that. Let's not think too grandly of ourselves, folks. And then after that, the European Union will be considered, and Zelensky, frankly, is at the end of the line. And that is, unfortunately or fortunately, whether you like it or not, that is the reality of what we're looking at. It's the nature of the world. And as we have long forecast on Radical Media, what's going to happen, which we said way, way back, and we're going to publish all these receipts again for you tomorrow, don't worry. But we said right at the start of the war, which if you recall, we always opposed, have always called Zelensky a corrupt despot, and in fact is a collaborator with Azov Nazis. Who remembers those days when Zelensky was collaborating with Azov Nazis and we were expected to fund it? All that's going to come to an end, and it's going to come to an end whether Zelensky likes it or not, and he doesn't like it. He has no say in it. This will not be on his terms. As we forecast a long time ago on Radical Media, the terms will be, and we'll publish again all of this tomorrow for you with the receipts and the forecasting a couple of years ago when we said the terms will be that Ukraine will split along the Dnieper River. Everything east of the Dnieper River, which is those regions that board Russia, will come under Russian sphere of influence. They will eventually be accepted as autonomous regions that are Russia allied. And then everything west of the Dnieper River will remain as Ukraine. It may or may well not be accepted as a member of the European Union for economic cooperation. That's something Putin is willing to cede, but Ukraine will not be granted membership of NATO, despite what Nigel Farage has recently said, with Richard Tice sat next to him, Tice being a long supporter of the war in Ukraine. So that's how it's going to unfold. We've long said that's how it's going to unfold, but we're going to come to demonstrate that right now. And to demonstrate that this is primarily a conversation between Trump and Putin, first and foremost, take a look at this. On your screens right now, President Trump has made it very clear that he wants Russia back in the G7. That's the 7 leading economic powers of the world. This stunned all the fake news reporters, says social media user George at Behezi Tweets. And then he quotes Trump, "I'd love to have them back. I think it was a mistake to throw them out. They should be sitting at the table. I think Putin would love to be back." Well, we're going to play for you that video. This just to demonstrate, this is primarily Trump and Putin involved in a bromance, recognizing something crucial in the state of affairs as they are in the world right now. And that is that they don't need anyone else's permission. They can do what they need to bilaterally, and then thirdly, with China eventually involved, trilaterally, and the rest of us will fall in line. They recognize that in the world as it is right now, post-Brexit and post-MAGA, the world as it is right now is a world that is going to be rapidly changing, and it is power that changes, that influences the course of this change, not whinging from the sidelines. So here is Trump saying very openly that he's very willing to fully reconcile with Putin and bring him back into the G7.
Russia back to the G7, sir?
I'd love to have him back. I think it was a mistake to throw him out. Look, it's not a question of liking Russia or not liking Russia. It was the G8. And you know, I said, what are you doing? You guys, all you talk about is Russia, and they should be sitting at the table. I think Putin would love to be back. Obama and a couple of other people made a mistake and they got Russia out. It's very possible that if that was the G8, you wouldn't have had the problem with Ukraine. And if I was president, you definitely wouldn't have had the problem with Ukraine. Russia would have never attacked Ukraine. But you ask a very good question, the G8. It used to be the G8, and then these people threw them out. And I was arguing with Trudeau and with numerous of the people. Actually, Prime Minister Abe, a great man from Japan, agreed with me 100%, and some of the others did too. But I got there, it was the G7, as you know. They had already been terminated. I think it would have been very helpful, and it still would be helpful to have Russia be a part of that mix. So and I think if they were, I don't think you...
So what we're witnessing, to translate that for you, is an end to the globalist machinations through projects such as the European Union, through projects such as borderless countries. We're witnessing an end to the globalist plan, if you like, and the victory, essentially, of a form of patriotism and in some instances even nationalism, to distinguish deliberately between the two there, but essentially a victim for the sovereign nation state over the globalist agenda of a superpower, a global superpower, led by a AI technocracy. And Trump and Putin are talking bilaterally in this regard to recognize each other's sovereignty and move together as one. And the one phone call between Trump and Putin that initiated this latest round of peace talks in Saudi Arabia sent the European continent, as this user Vince Langham says, into a full-blown panic. And we're going to play you a news clip just to demonstrate how the European Union has been completely left out of these bilateral conversations that are quite directly between Trump and Putin, as we said they would be. Look at this title. After the Syria revolution, 11th of December 2024, we said Trump and Putin cut a deal to de-escalate World War III. It's a very much US, Russia, Trump and Putin in particular bilateral conversation that will have huge, significant, historic impacts for the rest of us, not least that we end up avoiding World War III. But this has been the European reaction.
European leaders have gathered here at the Elysee for an emergency summit to discuss a fast-moving conversation about the future of Ukraine that appears to be excluding them. And they appear to have been rattled, first of all, by the phone call that President Donald Trump had for 90 minutes with Vladimir Putin, but also by the comments of his defense secretary in Brussels when he told his counterparts that he believed that a future for Ukraine inside NATO was unrealistic. So why do Europeans feel so strongly about being part of this conversation? Well, first of all, they have, since the invasion in 2022 of Ukraine, contributed more militarily than the United States did under President Biden. But Europeans are also worried about the tactics. They fear that the United States will negotiate poorly with Russia in their haste to end the war, leaving Ukraine marginalized and giving key concessions to Moscow. And there's the question of Ukraine itself not being around the negotiating table. The fear when it comes to that is that the 6 million Ukrainians currently living under Russian rule simply aren't going to get a say in what happens, but also that Europe could then be sidelined in terms of any talks regarding the continental security of Europeans themselves. So this meeting, which has been described by Emmanuel Macron as informal, is a key moment, not just for the European Union, but for NATO, as both try and figure out how to remain relevant in talks not just about Ukraine.
So the Europeans are worried about being sidelined. They are being sidelined. And this is why you're hearing talk, which we're coming to in a moment, of Europe guaranteeing its own security. Well, Trump's not interested in guaranteeing the security of Europe any longer either. They weren't initially paying their own fair share of NATO contributions into their own defense capabilities. Trump has long been complaining about that. And it's got to a point now where Trump and Putin have recognized that this war would primarily involve their two countries going at loggerheads against each other on behalf of everybody else. And therefore, it makes sense, if they want peace, to talk to each other on behalf of everybody else as well. And that's why even Putin has recognized about Trump that what those two agree is what's going to happen. And that's, again, a clip we have for you. This user here named Russia is not the enemy says, they're quoting from the video of Putin. President Trump, with his character and firmness, will establish order in Europe quite quickly, and all of them will stand at the master's feet, wagging their tails tenderly. Everything soon will fall into place. That's what Putin has said, and we have the video for you of Putin saying that.
Трамп с его характером, с его настойчивостью, он наведет там порядок довольно быстро. И все они, вот увидите, это произойдет быстро, скоро. Все они встанут у ноги хозяина и будут нежно помахивать хвостиком.
He's actually correct. That is what's going to happen. It will be a deal between Trump and Putin, as we've been saying from the start, and the rest of the world will fall into place. But this is why they were so keen not to allow for Trump to return to office. Because, again, as regulars will know, it's been clear for a long time that Trump has been anti-war and anti-perma-war and anti-globalism. So his coming back to office was always going to lead to cancelling World War III. And those that were preventing him from coming to office have always been those who have been against a leader in the West coming to power with that much power in the world, in history's strongest country, to be able to stop the West facing a World War III moment with Russia. Trump is the only leader that could have done it. That's why they were so desperate to prevent him getting into power again. He managed to get in again, and the rest is history. World War III will now be cancelled. It's good news for everybody. Congratulations. It's not going to happen. Obviously, we were of the view that it never was going to happen, because it was always inevitable that Trump would win after what they tried to do in 2020. But of course, people had their doubts. We hope you can see now what we meant. And those Zelensky fanboys and the globalist fanboys and those cheerleading for the Warhawks are incredulous. You can see here from Ed Krasenstein's posts. I never thought I'd see the day when the US would side with Russia and Putin against Ukraine and Europe. Putin is a war criminal. He's a thug. He's a cheat. He's a murderer. Trump should be ashamed of himself. Well, none of that whinging is going to get them anywhere, nor indeed is Zelensky's own whinging, nor his rants, his pro-war rants and talk of a European-wide army to defend Ukraine, as you can see him doing in this clip.
Us, then who will stop them? Really? Let's be honest, now we can't rule out the possibility that America might say no to Europe on an issue that threatens it. Many leaders have talked about Europe that needs its own military, an army of Europe. And I really believe that time has come. The armed forces of Europe must be created.
Well, thankfully, by now, everyone's realized what an absolute pillock that man is. Aside from his personal, and I mean by personal life problems, including what appears to be a very nasty habit that he has, if you get my drift. But that man is not going to be listened to. Whatever he does next, he's going to have to fall in line with what Trump and Putin agree. And in that vein, it is the Russians have also recognized. You can see here, we're going to show you in a second a clip of Lavrov, the Russian foreign secretary, discussing what came out of the Saudi peace talks. But you can see here user clandestine saying Rubio arrives in Saudi Arabia to meet with Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov. US and Russian delegations will begin laying the groundwork for the upcoming summit between Trump and Putin. World War III is about to be cancelled. It's happening. It is indeed happening. Congratulations. We've been saying for a long time this is what will happen under Trump. It will lead to peace in Ukraine. Beyond that, peace in the Middle East with Syria. Beyond that, the Abraham Accords will be resurrected. There will be a peace still struck between Israel and the Arab world in return for recognition of a Palestinian state. All of that is what we've been saying is going to happen for a long time. We are way down the line in that plan now of Operation Peace Spring, and there will be global peace as a result, regardless of what anyone says or does in the meanwhile, Zelensky included. They will not be able to derail this because nothing can stop what is coming. And Sky News reports, as is on your screens now, US and Russian diplomatic officials have begun peace talks on ending the war in Ukraine as they meet in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And Rubio has said while he was at that meeting, the only leader, as reported by Sky News here, the only leader in the world who can make this happen is Trump. And that is indeed correct. And Lavrov has said from those talks, when President Trump and President Putin spoke on the phone, they agreed to put aside the absurd period when the two great superpowers didn't talk at all. And that was clearly under Biden. And here is Lavrov discussing this, his reflections on these peace talks.
Always, when we go to negotiation, what we want to do is to listen to what our partners have to offer. When Presidents Trump and Putin talked over the phone, they agreed on the need to put aside the absurd period in the relationship between two great superpowers when they essentially didn't communicate at all, aside from certain technical issues. And the presidents agreed that the dialogue should be restored and resumed on all matters that can somehow be settled with the contribution of the United States.
So this is Lavrov again making it clear the period of not having that bilateral relationship is over. Of course, Biden was responsible for making sure that they weren't talking. But with Trump as president, the US and Russia will start talking again. And Russia's ambassador to the UN, as Sky News reports, has said that the UK and the EU are absolutely unfaithful to their word and cannot be a party to any future agreement on the resolution to the Ukrainian crisis, making it clear, at least from the Russian side, that the UK and the EU will not be involved in this peace negotiation until matters are concluded, and then they will have to simply and be expected to simply follow suit, which is consistent with the analysis we've taken. This is primarily a Trump and Putin peace negotiation. The rest of the world will eventually have to follow through. The nature of the world as it is right now, only power will matter, and the UK and the EU have no power in this regard when it comes to these conversations. And here is Russia's ambassador to the UN making it explicit that they don't consider the UK or the EU as having any role in this peace, in the way this peace goes. We've burnt all of our chips when it comes to Russia because of the way in which we supported this disastrous war with that corrupt former comedian Zelensky in Ukraine. Here is Russia's ambassador to the UN saying exactly that.
We understand presently that the Minsk guarantors and on the whole EU countries and the United Kingdom are absolutely unfaithful to their word, and they cannot be a party to any future agreements on the resolution to the Ukrainian crisis whatsoever. They are blinded by primitive Russophobia, their maniacal desire to inflict defeat on our country on the battlefield using the Ukrainians who are left alive. Mr. President, we very much should like to hope that the 10th anniversary of the adoption of Resolution 2202 will be a good opportunity for our European colleagues to finally get back to reality, to stop provoking Zelensky and his henchmen towards futile confrontation. He himself, at any cost, clinging power, attempting to save his skin, is willing to engage in any provocation to prolong hostility.
So you see there, as far as the Russians are concerned, and they're the ones talking to Trump about this peace deal, and one imagines they're going to get their way on some of their core red lines, that the UK and the EU will have to wait in line and simply follow suit for whatever is agreed. And this is why it doesn't really matter what Nigel is saying here. Nigel Farage claims it's probably essential for Ukraine to join NATO for long-term peace. This follows the Secretary of Defense Hegseth stating that the administration views this as a non-starter. Here is Farage with Richard Tice curiously sat next to him, Tice being a long-term supporter of the Ukraine war and therefore being wrong for the long term. And here is Farage sat next to Tice saying exactly this. And trust me, folks, this isn't getting anywhere. Farage can say what he wants on this regard. It's just not going to happen.
Again, it's back to the previous question. I don't want to prejudge how these negotiations go, but I would have thought that if we're going to get Putin into a place and Zelensky into a place where we could have a reasonable negotiation, I would have thought, looking ahead, it's probably essential that Ukraine joins NATO. That's going to need to be part of this negotiation.
That's simply not going to happen because we're not going to get Russia or Putin into a place to do anything. As we've been arguing for the course of this stream, Russia and Putin, with Trump and America, are going to get the rest of us in a place to do something. We're not going to get them in a place to do anything. They're going to agree to what they agree, and then we are going to be told to follow suit. And if we don't like it, we're going to be told, make your own deals up, which we simply, frankly, don't have the military nor economic might to do. And that's what Trump knows, and that's what Putin knows. And so whatever we say, like whatever Farage just said there with long-term Ukraine war supporter Richard Tice sat right next to him, isn't really going to matter. It frankly won't mean anything. And that's why the Times headline today has made it very clear. Ukraine-Russia war live. Moscow won't accept NATO peacekeepers. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, calls proposals for Western peacekeepers on Russia's border unacceptable after talks with the US in Saudi Arabia. There will be no NATO forces in Ukraine. To read from the Times article, Russia will not accept the deployment of troops from NATO countries to Ukraine as part of any peace deal, Moscow's top diplomat has said following US-Russia talks in Riyadh. The appearance of troops from NATO countries under a foreign flag, the flag of the European Union, or the national flag is unacceptable, Sergei Lavrov said. He also said that Russia welcomed President Trump's comments that inviting Kyiv to join NATO had caused the war in Ukraine. Britain and Sweden, both NATO members, have said they would consider putting troops on the ground in Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. Notice that third paragraph. It says, he also said, notice this third paragraph, he also said that Russia welcomed President Trump's comments that inviting Kiev, in Ukraine that is, to join NATO had caused the war in Ukraine. In other words, this NATO thing is why they went to war. So there's no way they're going to give up the very reason they went to war, considering right now they've got no other reason to give up the war because Ukraine cannot win this war and Trump's in power and Trump says he wants to end this war. The Russians know that Trump wants to end the war and they refuse to end the war for which they went to war over in the first place if a condition is that Ukraine joins NATO. And that's why Ukraine is not going to join NATO. It's why they went to war over Ukraine in the first place, to prevent the NATO security border coming right up to bordering Russia. It simply will not happen, Nigel. And it's best to understand that this thing is far bigger than Britain and far bigger than the European Union and far bigger than both of those blocs' interests combined. Trump and Putin have no reason to expand NATO onto right up into Ukraine, onto the border with Russia. And frankly, Nigel knows that himself, which is why Nigel in 2022 on his own show on GB News is on the record stating exactly that. Have a listen to Nigel before he was sat next to Richard Tice on the stage this week. This is Nigel in 2022 on the fact that Ukraine will not join NATO.
I have thought for 30 years that the NATO policy, the EU policy of expanding ever eastwards was a huge strategic error. Yes, we know the Russians can be paranoid, but why poke the Russian bear with a stick? And if Vladimir Putin's one demand is that we state clearly that the Ukraine is not going to join NATO, why don't we do it? Well, some of you may say, isn't that appeasement? Isn't that giving in? But ask yourself a different question. What possible strategic benefit or asset could it be to us for the Ukraine to join NATO? Absolutely none whatsoever that I can see. So I think what Boris Johnson needs to do is to rethink the geopolitics of all of this, to convince other EU leaders, to convince the Americans that that is what we need to say. We take away Putin's casus belli. And actually, I think if Putin gets that, he won't invade and a war can be avoided. That's my view. That's my take. No one I speak to thinks the Ukraine joining NATO is a good idea, yet nobody out there says what I've just said, that we should
Well, now listen to this again and tell me which version you believe. Here's Nigel this week.
Again, it's back to the previous question. I don't want to prejudge how these negotiations go, but I would have thought that if we're going to get Putin into a place and Zelensky into a place where we could have a reasonable negotiation, I would have thought, looking ahead, it's probably essential that Ukraine joins NATO. That's going to need to be part of this negotiation.
So, to be charitable, it's a negotiation clause, but what we are saying is it simply won't make the final cut, and Ukraine will not be part of NATO. Ukraine, everything east and northeast of the Dnieper River, will become part of the Russian sphere of influence, perhaps autonomous, as the entire country was before the color revolution that the CIA sparked in that country. And then everything southwest of the Dnieper River that cuts across like this, that will be Ukraine proper. Zelensky will have no choice but to suck it up because of the fact that a peace deal was initially agreed. And if you remember, we as a country flew Boris Johnson to Ukraine to scupper that peace deal. And as the Times reports, Zelensky's realized what's going on. Headlined from today's Times, Ukraine's fears deepen as US and Russia discuss end of war by Easter. After Marco Rubio met Sergei Lavrov in Saudi Arabia, Kiev reads between the lines of Trump's remarks about an all-conquering Kremlin. So they've all realized that this is a Trump-Putin show and everyone else is going to have to fall in line. From that Times article, you can see some of the quotes there. The Times report, 17th of February 2022, the Trump administration is reported to have set itself an ambitious target of Easter, which is just over 2 months away, to finalize a ceasefire deal for the 3-year conflict. He continued in terms that suggested he accepted Russia had the upper hand militarily and was likely to win on the battlefield if Ukraine did not accept terms. They have a big, powerful machine. You understand that, he said. They defeated Hitler and they defeated Napoleon. You know, they've been fighting a long time. They've done it before. But I think he would like to stop fighting. That's all Trump quotes from Trump. In his Fox interview broadcast before the Super Bowl, Trump said that Ukraine may make a deal. This is, again, another direct quote. He said that Ukraine may make a deal. They may not make a deal. They may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday. But we're going to have all this money in Ukraine, and I say I want it back. Trump has buried Biden's nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine mantra, with no representatives from Kiev or indeed the rest of Europe present in Riyadh. So he's pretty much cut everybody out. You can see there, Trump has converted the war into one of simply, I want the money back. We want to be paid back for everything we funded, even if that means having right to half of Ukraine's rare earth minerals, which do exist there. And frankly, considering the amount of money they plowed into the country, it's going to be difficult for Zelensky to say no. The Ukrainians refused to sign that deal for half of the rights to the rare earth minerals in Ukraine because they wanted security guarantees for Ukraine against Russia, i.e. NATO membership. They won't get that. And as Trump did recently with Gaza, he's saying, look, all of this money we've been plowing into this region, we want to stop the war and we want a return on our investment. Ultimately, you're looking at a man who is a businessman becoming president. He's going to look at the world through an economic lens, not a military lens, and certainly not a globalist lens. Zelensky, who has been cut out from this deal, again, as the Times reports, he was next door in the United Arab Emirates, though he was cut out and excluded from the peace talks in Riyadh. He was next door on Sunday, and he said he intended to visit Saudi Arabia, right? But no dates were yet set. So he was trying to elbow himself in there, see if he could get himself an invite. What happens? Zelensky postpones his Saudi Arabia trip. And just to read from the Times there, Ukraine's President Zelensky has announced that his proposed trip to Saudi Arabia has been postponed until March the 10th. He was originally due to visit Riyadh on Wednesday, after being in the UAE on Monday and Turkey today. The Saudis pretty much said to him, get lost. He's not going to be part of these peace negotiations. He will do whatever Trump tells him to do. And that is something which, as we reported in Radical Media, you can see there from the 5th of December, 2024, Syria Civil War II, Empire Strikes Back. A quote from that piece there. The truth is that most of the world is essentially exhausted fighting these proxy wars. A grand regional settlement is inevitable. That was our forecast. It has been for many years. And you can see it there. Again, a grand regional settlement is inevitable. These latest moves in Syria are more likely to be the death throes of various players who are jostling for position before President Trump brings an end to these conflicts. And that is exactly what's happened. And Trump's gone even further. Not that you'd hear it in any of your corporatist globalist press, but he's even promised not only to denuclearize the great powers, but to denuclearize them at scale. And you can see on your screens, reported by ABC News. There's no ABC News. There's no reason for us to be building brand new nuclear weapons. We already have so many you could destroy the world 50 times over, 100 times over. President Trump said he talked to Russian President Putin about denuking, adding that the two agreed they would do it in a very big way. And we're going to leave you with that clip. Again, it's on a positive note. Here's President Trump saying they are going to denuclearize the world with Russia and China involved as well. And he's saying, if you listen to this carefully, they've already agreed it all. It's already happening. The rest of the world, led by globalist warhawks, will have no choice but simply to play catch up. This is no longer their world. They are no longer in power. They no longer get to set the terms, and they no longer get to continue to wage permanent war.
Well, I'd like to have that. As soon as things settle down, I'm going to have that conference, primarily with China and Russia, because those are the two that really are out there. And we're going to have them spend a lot less money, and we're going to spend a lot less money. And I know they're going to do it. They agreed to it. We were talking about denuking, and President Putin and I agreed that we were going to do it in a very big way. There's no reason for us to be building brand new nuclear weapons. We already have so many. You could destroy the world 50 times over, 100 times over. And here we are building new nuclear weapons, and they're building nuclear weapons, and China's building new nuclear weapons, and China's trying to catch up because, you know, they're very substantially behind, but within 5 or 6 years, they'll be even. And we're all spending a lot of money that we could be spending on other things that are actually, hopefully, much more productive. Hopefully, there'll never be a time when we need those weapons. If there's ever a time when we need nuclear weapons, like the kind of weapons that we're building and that Russia has and that China has to a lesser extent, but will have, that's going to be a very sad day. That's going to be.
Congratulations, folks. A grand regional settlement is inevitable. World War III is being cancelled. Peace is on the way. And once we have peace in place and a few Nobel Prizes dished out, we'll see a period of economic prosperity from the stability. And the Middle East will probably turn into the next huge growth area in the world. Exhausted from war as it is, the people will make the effort, 10 times the effort, to sustain the peace because they so freshly know the horrors of war. That's all we've got time for today. All of the receipts from this stream will be published in the Radical Dispatch tomorrow. We thank everybody on Radical Media who subscribes. If you're a premium subscriber, a paying premium subscriber, you will get access to this Warrior Creed live stream as a podcast in both its audio and visual format. You will also get access to the behind the paywall content on the Radical Dispatch and the premium Radical podcast, which is separate to this Warrior Creed stream. We thank you for your premium support. We cannot do this work without your support. And anyone who's interested, go to majidnawaz.substack.com to subscribe. And we'll see you next time.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.